Right, good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us for what is our traditional start to Christmas, shall we say, the ULAS seminar. Um, we've had an incredibly busy year. I don't need to tell most of you because most of you work for ULAS anyway. We've had our 30th anniversary and it's been one of the busiest years we've had yet. Our work on the commercial side of things, it tends to go in cycles, and sometimes we're doing lots of one type of our work, lots of evaluations and smaller projects, and other times we'll be at the very end of the sort of project cycle and be doing lots of big excavations. And that has been true of our work for the last couple of years. So tonight we're going to hear about two of these projects: an urban one from in the centre of Leicester, and one of our rural projects, which is one that we actually sort of did the evaluation for at the very start of ULAS almost 30 years ago. I was involved in that, so it was really great to see the excavation and everything that came from that. So our first talk tonight is from Joseph Peters, going to be talking about the archaeology of Leicester Market, and obviously we're really lucky here to have the opportunity to work on rural and urban excavations, and so all the benefits of the skills that the team can benefit from doing that. And we've been part of the uncovering understanding of Leicester for many years as part of the history of ULAS, but even before, when the archaeology was from the county council. But there are still some areas of Leicester that we haven't been able to look at, even though we've done many projects in and around the city centre, because of the nature of modern activities on the site. And this is probably one of those where we haven't really understood what the archaeological survival was, what might be there, because the place has been used as a market. But luckily, someone had the great idea of redeveloping it. And so I'll hand you over to Joseph now to find out what he's been uncovering with the team over the last few months.
Oh, well, thank you all for being here. I recognise a lot of you already, but for those of you that don't know who I am, I'm Joseph Peters. I'm the on-site lead for the work that's being done here at Leicester Market. So over the course of this talk, I'll be telling you about the work that we've done both this year and last year, some of the reception that we've had to our works and findings, and then giving you an insight as to what the future works are going to entail into the new year. Okay. So originally, ULAS started works in Leicester Market in 2024. This was work done by one of our colleagues, Wayne Jarvis, that I also worked with him on. And part of that work was just after they'd demolished the old market. So the big roof was destroyed, everything was levelled. And as part of that process, they needed to do a series of borehole investigations, as well as removing some of the concrete stanchions that supported the roof of the market. So you can see here we've got a plan and a nice young photo of me from 1 year ago. So on the plan, where you can see my cursor, these sort of larger, sort of lined out ones, the SH01, 02, and 03, are some of the stanchions that were removed. So big concrete pads in the ground that are removed via a machine, giving us a chance to look at the preserved archaeology that's been truncated by them. And the smaller dots that you can see around are some of the series of boreholes that were done to try and get an understanding of the sort of soil compositions of the market. Giving us an insight into the stratigraphy and a little bit of an understanding into a part of Leicester that until now we've done very little on and we don't know a lot about. So, moving into this year, we were originally contracted to come out to see a series of few trial holes that were being dug in anticipation of tree pits to be excavated around the perimeter of the site. This was work that was presumed to only be a couple days' work, I believe. And that was back in July, so obviously things have changed a bit from then. So leading up to the latest plan of what we've done here. So this was a plan from November, and all the blacked out grey area that you can see on the screen is areas that we've investigated. So quite a large percentage of the site. However, our understanding of it is varied. So you can see from some of the linear shaded in areas. These are where modern service pipes were removed, giving us an opportunity to investigate the sections, get an understanding of the stratigraphy, which has been great because it gives you a chance to really look at some of the makeups of the marketplaces. You can see the different phases of the market. We've been able to identify structural remains within the market, as well as even going down to earlier Roman stuff that survives beneath it. So you can see here some more of the photos. Again, in this bottom one here, getting a record of some of the market surfaces and structural remains. This particular one, we had a series of post holes and various stuff relating to market structures that are sort of capped within the various layers, and we've seen that elsewhere across site. Phases of building that go in and out of use in the lifespan of the surfaces of the market. So towards the north of the site, one of the main features that's come up, I'm sure all of you here know about, is the discovery of the Gainsborough Chamber, or what some people have been calling the Vile Dungeon. I think I called it the Gruesome Dungeon in a BBC interview, so we can keep adding to that if you'd like. But yeah, fantastic discovery of a late 16th century civic building that we've had historic maps and records sort of noting that there's been a building here. A lot of the historic records that we had said that it was demolished, so we weren't sure what the structural remains would be surviving. However, from opening it up, we've been able to find quite a nice surviving structure. So you can see in this overview photo here, we've got some nice sort of walls surviving. From investigations, we know these from top of the wall go down about 3 meters deep, so quite a significant structural remains there. The walls are mostly comprised of Daneshill sandstone with granite facing stones internal, all adding information to support the idea that this is what at some point was used as a dungeon. We've been able to utilize the professionals at the university while recording and understanding the Gainsborough Chamber. We were lucky enough to get the support from James Seglia, who's come out and did some RTI scanning of the structure. And what we're able to identify in the plaster on this sort of south-facing part of the wall here was that there are lots of scratchings, what we originally interpreted as graffiti. And from the RTI scanning, we've been able to sort of pick out those scratchings even more. Unfortunately, because we've not been able to expose that much of that face of the wall, we are still trying to determine what those scratchings mean, but there's definitely signs of some sort of stuff being carved into the plaster. In addition to the help from Jane, we were able to get Rachel Armitage out to do some 3D scanning of the Gainsborough as well. So again, being able to utilise the academics in the university has been a real boon for us when trying to understand these complicated features in the middle of the city. So originally this was opened up so that they could put in their new drainage. So because of the discovery of this, the drainage has now been moved. We've got a new different design plan for where the drainage goes, and the Gainsborough itself will be preserved in situ moving forward. So the main bulk of our work, apart from obviously recording all the drains that were being done, was the installation of the previously mentioned tree pits. So we've got 10 running around the sort of perimeter of the site. The first one up here in green. You can't really see my cursor on the screen, I just noticed that. In the sort of top left, first green one, tree pit 1, and then going clockwise around to tree pit 10. All the ones in green have been signed off now, and the ones that we're currently working on are in yellow. So this sort of summarises a lot of the finds that we've been getting on site inside these tree pits as well as elsewhere. So from tree pit 1, oh, don't know why I did that. Help. There we go. So from tree pit 1, Again, so same with the Gainsborough Chamber. From looking at historic records and knowing that we had that building there, we also knew about the fact that we had a building called the Shambles. So this was a medieval structure that was then later rebuilt around the same time as the construction of the Gainsborough Chamber. From our tree pit, we're able to find structural remains that are possibly associated with that later building, walls with brick and clay surfaces, not typically associated with external surfaces. So we think we could have part of that building, but being such a large building, we've only got a limited space to sort of identify it, but sort of fits quite nicely with the historic plans that we have. Over in Tree Pit 2, which is in this corner, we started to find lots of Roman layers, lots of pits and different sort of Roman deposits. The thing with the Roman archaeology that's been quite interesting about this site is that it survives quite high. For anyone that's done work in Leicester before, or urban generally, will know that sometimes to get to those Roman deposits you have to go quite deep because of all the build-up. But because it's been a market for so long, a lot of the Roman stuff has been capped quite high. So in parts, we're finding Roman archaeology from approximately 1.5 meters from the current ground level. So surviving extremely high compared to other parts of the city. So yeah, Roman layers found in the sort of this side of the site along the what's that sort of northeastern sort of face of the site. As we go down to Tree Pit 5 here, I believe. Yeah, we've got evidence of Roman buildings. We've got multiple phases of Roman building that we're still uncovering. This is one that we've sort of been in and out of that tree pit at various stages, so we've got a good understanding of the different phases of Roman building there, including a earlier Roman building with obsidian floor. And underneath that obsidian floor, we managed to find the remains of a child burial. There's possibility we may find more of that activity. We still have got a large extent of that obsidian floor still to be uncovered. But again, sort of Roman burial practices, not too unfamiliar to find in the city, but again, more evidence of sort of Roman activity in that part of the site. As we move down, we've found evidence for Roman pottery kilns, which, to my knowledge, is one of the first times that we've been able to identify that in the city. Roman pottery kilns that have been found in Leicester are normally found outside of the city. So this is the first time that we've been able to identify it actually within the sort of city boundaries. And as you move further down towards the sort of south of the site, more Roman buildings starting to come up, possibly earlier Roman buildings, timber frame structures, where all we're getting surviving is post holes and beam slots and sort of associated surface layers. So all of this is then being capped by the later sort of early medieval market surfaces, which we're seeing sort of stretch out across the entirety of the site, which themselves are then later relayed and then capped in between the makeup layers of those surfaces are all the structural remains that I was talking about earlier. And then towards the south of the site, here we're finding lots of sort of activity associated with leather production and workshops. From some of our historic plans, we obviously know about where all the market stalls were, or at least in certain periods. We do have an indication that a lot of the crafting being done for the market was being done towards this southern part of the site. We know about leather production around there. So what we're finding, or at least what we believe to sort of be finding, is a series of pits, all containing sort of post-medieval deposits, extremely organic material, lots of leather offcuts, wooden artifacts, lots of sort of nice creepy crawly stuff like animal hair and stuff coming up. So super, super organic. And we've been doing quite an extensive sample of these materials coming up. So hopefully should give us a bit more insight into not only what's being sold in the market, but the goods that are being produced in this area as well. So, as a general sort of overview, obviously time restricted for this talk, that's the main bulk of things that are coming up. Um, we've been able to identify lots of other stuff that I'll be able to go into detail if people would like to talk afterwards, but that's the main bulk of interesting things that have come up so far. So yeah, in addition to all the interesting things, we obviously had quite a lot of media coverage of the site. I'm sure you've all been familiar with some of the articles that have come out about the dungeon. Um, you can see me here being very nervously interviewed for BBC East Midlands, not really knowing what to say. And then, yeah, as you can see, sort of local news articles from Leicester and the BBC, but also getting a lot of attraction internationally as well, with articles by the Smithsonian and the Miami Herald. So sort um, good sort of attraction outside of the country towards the site and the archaeology being found. So to summarise where we're currently at and what we plan to do moving forward, we are currently in the phase of finalising the last few tree pits. Don't know why that was not showing all of them there. So we're currently working on tree pits 4 to 9. As far as I'm aware, we might have even finished one of them off today. Yeah, I'm getting a thumbs up there from my colleague. Tree pit 9, I think that must be. But hopefully by Christmas, we're looking at signing over 3 of the 6 tree pits we need to complete. Tree pits that are still ongoing are the ones that I previously mentioned, 5, which has all the various phases of Roman building, as well as 7 and 8, where all the leather is coming up. So in addition to finalising those tree pits, we'll be looking at hand excavating a large extent of this new diverted drain that needs to be installed. So a runoff drain for the final design of the market that will be going down approximately 0.5 metre through archaeological remains, which again should give us a good insight into any structural remains or more layers associated with the market, potentially even coming to the top of the Roman levels that we're seeing across site. In addition to that, we already know that we're going to have to look at some bollards around the site, and there may also be additional groundwork. So again, sort of going back to that original plan that I showed you that covered where we've excavated, going from part of Leicester that has previously had not a lot of work done on it, we will ultimately, by the end of this project, have excavated quite a wide percentage of the market and have a good understanding of the origins of the market. We're seeing all the layers that sort of sit beneath the earliest surface of the market. So that'll give us hopefully a bit of a better insight into how the market was formed.
Okay, so we'll go for a contrasting talk now, in terms of location at least. And this is one of our large rural excavations out near Wanlip, which, if any of you know that area, will know it's beautifully placed next to a large sewage treatment work. So this is one, as I mentioned earlier, we looked at, evaluated back in the late 90s when I first started here, and it had revealed some really tantalising clues about potentially a very long-lived and multi-faceted kind of part of the landscape. So I'm going to hand you over to Richard and Andy, who will explain what they found and how they managed to survive next to a sewage works for nearly a year.
My sense of smell is still not quite recovered. Hello, everybody. Yes, and welcome to this ULAS Christmas talk. Now, John's already kind of introduced us, but for those amongst you who don't know who we are, I'm Andy McLeish, and over there in the very natty Christmas jumper is Richard Huxley. We are both project officers with ULAS. Together we ran the Wanlip excavations over 2024-25, and our aim with the talk this evening is to give you more of an edited highlight selection of some of the archaeology that our team uncovered during the excavation. There's an awful lot to show, especially when you're trying to condense 11 months of excavation into 30 minutes, so we'll have to go through some of this quite quickly. At this stage we can't go into masses of detail, but as a little background, on the slide I've stolen this directly from Stephen Trent's project site, but the project's scope of the project is to replace about 70% of Wanlip sewage works, in addition to creating extra capacity to bring some of the works out of the floodplain of the River Soar, which is just in the top left background in the photo. For a project this size and duration, a very large compound was needed by Kia and NWH groups who were doing the work for office, welfare, car parking, lay-down areas for plant and machinery. We're talking 12 hectares of excavation area, which is where we come back in. Previous archaeological work in the late 90s and early noughties had identified that the area which is going to contain the main compound had high potential for significant remains. In August 2024, work began on a geophysical survey, which was followed by extensive trial trenching based on this. After this, the site went immediately into excavation. Now, what we have here is what the trenching showed, and we've overlaid this on the plans from earlier excavations of 20 years ago. Now, if I can turn on the laser pointer. So all of these previous work ULAS has undertaken in here. In fact, we are still turning up legible tags from those excavations. So due to the requirement of the civil engineers for various bits of land to work on in a specific order, the excavation strategy we had to alter to accommodate this, which is why we have this lovely coloured coded map, which you'd think we dug in 1 to 6. No, we didn't. In consultation with Kia, the excavation was divided into priority areas so they could start work on their compound construction, and we also had to mitigate the impact on the archaeology. This meant stripping the site became a bit of a challenge, especially with the need to maintain a haul road across the site for almost the full length of the excavation. In terms of excavation area and the sheer amount of material we've moved, this is one of the biggest excavations ULAS has undertaken in, I think, nearly 20 years, although I do stand to be corrected on that. Starting in late October 24, stripping took nearly 5 months through the depths of winter into spring 2025, and we did periodically have to stop the plant due to weather and ground conditions. At one point, we were told with 3 excavators and a dozen dumpers of various sizes that we have over £1 million worth of plant running. And the photo illustrates one of the issues we had with dumper trucks loaded up to 20 tons running on soft ground do periodically have a habit of getting stuck. And it sometimes takes a little assistance from a 360 to unstick them. But thankfully, with the plant crew we had were extremely good, and the stand downs are minimal, and even more remarkably, there was very little damage on the level of the archaeology. But when we had everything finally stripped, this is what we had in the end. And a note here, this is our working plans, which we'd update every week for the monitoring meetings. This does date from much later in the excavation. All the red is slots that we've excavated, but this does show, what it does show is the quantity of archaeology that we had to tackle on site. And for 7 months, we had the assistance of a lovely group of staff from York Archaeological Trust, who became the core of our team for a lot of the excavation before the ULAS team expanded. And I would like to say here that they were an absolutely brilliant bunch and very much missed. It's worth noting here as well, as having a busy excavation with a lot of complex archaeology, that time had to be spent getting new staff, some with limited experience up to speed to the requirements of the job. Frequent toolbox talks and as much one-to-one time as often as it could be spared was done, and this is where having good supervisors is not only invaluable but vital to spread the workload to enable trading and ensure good quality work was being done. So I would just like, I know Graham's not here, but Joe is. So yes, thank you for that, and also some of our more experienced ULAS excavators for supporting and advising our newer staff. But what have we found, we hear you ask? Well, let's start with some of our earliest material, and for this I will hand back over to Rich.
Give me notes now. Okay, thanks, Andy. So, as Andy mentioned, we were at Wanlip for about 11 months, and we're still occasionally visiting parts of the site to do watching briefs. Some of us have even been there today.
I think last year we told the contractors on site that we'd be finished by Christmas. We just didn't tell them which Christmas. Now, Wanlip is a very unusual site. It's a site which has been known about for more than 25 years, and with that build-up, there's always the chance that it won't deliver and will end up being less interesting than we thought. But fortunately for me and Andy, the site produced some amazing archaeology. During the full 25 years investigation, I think we found artefacts and activity from every period in human history. So I'm going to go through some of this activity with you all tonight, and then Andy's going to finish off and talk about some of the unusual wooden artefacts that we've been finding. And just to note that I'm going to refer to the Anglo-Saxon period as the early medieval period during this talk, but you might find that we use the terms interchangeably. So let's begin by talking about some of the prehistoric remains at Wanlip. Most of the artefacts from this period were worked flint that were occurring residually in later features, and our first artefact was personally collected by our manager while visiting, and it's this lovely Middle Paleolithic flint hand axe on the left of the screen. It's thought to be part of a Neanderthal hunting set, and at approximately 60,000 years old, this remarkable find is definitely the oldest on our site. But we also found these two beautiful late Neolithic or early Bronze Age flint arrowheads. While the majority of evidence for prehistoric activity came from the worked flint, this wasn't the only evidence, and several prehistoric features were identified. These tended to be pits dotted around the hillside, and I've highlighted them with purple dots from the plan. The artefacts within them included Middle Neolithic, Peterborough pottery as seen in the bottom right, and Iron Age loom weights which were in the bottom left. Towards the top of the hill we also had a very faint ephemeral circular feature that was very difficult to excavate, and this is possibly the remains of a very poorly preserved Bronze Age round barrow. The prehistoric activity at Wanlip ties in with the other sites in the area, such as the Neolithic remains found at Rothley, and the Bronze Age and Iron Age activity at Broadnook. And if you don't know where that is, it's the housing development on the opposite side of the A6 from Wanlip. And slowly we're piecing together information about this prehistoric landscape. So now let's move from prehistory and into the Roman period. The Roman remains were mostly found on the south-facing side of the hill and consisted of a roughly rectangular enclosure, which is highlighted with the black lines in the bottom half of the plan. We also found a trackway, which is marked by the two parallel black lines. However, at the moment, we aren't certain if this was formed during the Roman or early medieval periods. Within the enclosure, there was a concentration of activity in the southeastern corner, which is where the black circle is located. The features included post holes, pits, and a corn drive, which you can see in the top right. Unfortunately, the features were all very shallow in this region, and they were found just below the topsoil, so they're likely to be badly truncated. But whilst they are poorly preserved, they're hinting at the presence of a structure in this part of the enclosure. Further evidence of habitation within this part of the enclosure comes from the increase in domestic waste we found in the enclosure ditch. Many fragments of pottery were found, and these were often large sherds and occasionally near-complete vessels, such as the examples on the slide. Much of the activity dates to the late Roman period, around the mid-3rd to 4th century. Also within this corner of the enclosure is a large pit that had been dug, which is the photo in the top right. Part of the enclosure ditch had been diverted, so it fed into this pit, and the feature was filled with blue clay, suggesting it used to contain water. And this is probably the first evidence of water management at Wanlip. Now, part of the problem we've had distinguishing between the Roman and early medieval activity at Wanlip is the potential that Roman artefacts were being reused in the later period. There are several suspected instances of this happening at the site. For example, this Roman tile with the dog paw print in the centre was found in an early medieval structure, and this was a relatively common occurrence at the site. And others, this late Roman pottery base on the left, which seems to have been deliberately rounded. It's unusual because it was found in a pit within the early medieval enclosure at the opposite end of the site to where we were finding the focus of Roman activity. Another strange occurrence is this very large vessel in the centre and right-hand side of the screen. It had a diameter of more than half a metre and had been inverted in a pit. And the pit itself truncates a thin layer of silt, and our preliminary investigation into the vessel suggests it's probably Roman. However, we found other similar layers of silt elsewhere on the site, and these have contained early medieval artefacts and had early medieval features dug into them. So we're left wondering, is this an early medieval pit which has had a large Roman vessel inverted and buried within it? Further work's needed to understand these complicated features. And it's a similar story with the trackway I mentioned earlier. it contains a mixture of artefacts from both the Roman and early medieval periods, so it's difficult to know whether it's a Roman trackway that's been infilled during the early medieval period or was an early medieval trackway that contains Roman artefacts. For most of its length, the trackway was a depression or holloway formed in the soft sands that were located at the top of the hill. The western end had a clear increase in the number of artefacts within it and seems to have been the location for an early medieval midden. A range of small and large pits were regularly found along its length, however, these were frequently ephemeral and were difficult to spot. The eastern end contained a metal surface and was the location of a very complicated series of intercutting pits, which is where the black circle is on the plan. Some of these pits have been dug into the stone surface, others were found beneath it, and you can see these in the pictures on the right. Many of the pits were filled with a blue clay and they contained fragments of wood and the possibly watering holes. And as if this wasn't complicated enough, the area was being crossed by a second, later trackway and a northwest to southeast alignment, which are the two narrow black lines on the plan. Both the trackways were being regularly truncated by modern drains, as you can see in the picture in the top left, and Roman archaeology was found beneath them. Wheel ruts were found in the later trackway, and this was one of the characteristics that helped us identify it as being the same feature. Adjacent to the later trackway was a line of large cobbles that seemed to be forming a T-shape, and this can be seen in the other pictures on the screen. The large cobbles seemed to be in a shallow trench, and voids that may be post holes were occasionally found along it, although we weren't sure if these were caused by later disturbance. The remains of another stone surface made of pebbles was also found on the opposite side of the large cobbles. This area represents the crossover between the Roman and early medieval archaeology at Wanlip, and it was very complicated. In terms of its complexity, the small area of the field was more akin to urban archaeology than rural archaeology, and it was some of the most difficult I've ever encountered. And to make it harder to understand, many of the different elements that form this region have been created using stones. So identifying where one feature stopped and the other began was challenging enough, let alone trying to date when the stone was put there. To make matters worse, this area was directly in the way of the development, and a temporary road had to be built around the outside to allow us more time to work on it. And the team really did work hard to complete it. It was excavated around May during heat waves, and the team would often be moving around holding up a large tarpaulin so we could photograph large areas of the cobbles without changes in contrast. From above, it's possible to see just how close this complicated area was to the edge of the development, which is marked by the blue line. So what do all these stones mean? The lines of large cobbles, the stone surfaces, the trackways? Well, there have been several ideas since it was first identified in 1998. During 1999, part of the later trackway and the large cobbles were exposed, and the features were thought to be part of a Roman road. In 2003, a sewer was dug across the field, and the area on the other side of the large cobbles was exposed, and a rectangular surface thought to be the floor of a building was revealed. So as you can see from this picture, I've highlighted the areas of disturbance with the red lines, and after more than 20 years of activity in the field digging drains and sewers and trenches, the remains we found were incomplete. But by piecing the information back together, we do have some ideas about what was happening. So in this picture, I've given the separate stone elements a different colour in order to make this horribly complicated area a bit more understandable. So there are two trackways, and whilst the holloway may be Roman, the later trackway, first identified in 1998, is not a Roman road as it covers early medieval features. Now, if we turn our attention to the 2003 sewer excavations and overlay our results with the area suspected to be a floor, which I've outlined in red, we find that it is next to the line of large cobbles. And this suggests we may be seeing the fragmentary remains of a building next to the later trackway, which has used cobbles for the foundations and pebbles for the internal surfaces. Interestingly, this area is where, the area where this possible building was located is a relatively flat area of the hillside, which may have been terraced. The natural ground in this particular spot was very hard and compacted, and the large cobbles seem to be the same height of it. And this may represent a deliberate attempt to level off part of the hillside to build a timber frame building. Currently, we're not sure what date the later trackway and the possible building are. We can see that an early medieval sunken feature building, or SFB, which is highlighted yellow on the left, is next to the trackway, but this may be from a different phase as it's also next to the holloway. As you can see from the dashed line on the plan, the projected line of this later trackway seems to head towards the northwestern corner of the site, And this is an area where we found an increase in features containing Stamford ware pottery, and I've circled where we were finding them. This pottery was produced for about 400 years, from 850 to 1250, and it's possible the later trackway and cobble building are from this broad time period. The northwestern corner of the site contained a relatively high quantity of domestic waste, and many features produced a mixture of early medieval and Stamford ware pottery, so we may be looking at the earlier use of Stamford ware. However, as you can see from the plan in the bottom corner of the screen, there are several phases of activity overlapping one another, so further work is needed for us to understand this complex region. The early medieval settlement at Wanlip contained several fire pits and sunken featured buildings known as SFBs, and these were scattered around the northern and central parts of the site. The fire pits were generally rectangular pits that contained heat-affected cobbles and may have been used for cooking, since the hot stones would retain heat for a long time. A range of SFBs were found at Wanlip, and for those of you who aren't familiar with this type of structure, there's a nice reconstruction drawing in the centre that Andy found. And their characteristics are typically a pit with nearby post holes, and they're generally considered to be workshops or storerooms. However, their styles vary a great deal. At Wanlip, we had several varieties of SFBs, so we'll start with the photo in the top left and work our way around clockwise, and we'll have a look at some of these examples. The first SFB had two posts within a large pit, and this one was the largest we had on site, measured about 3.8 metres long. The pit was broad and flat and possibly used as a sunken floor. And this one had been filled with a pile of stones and Roman tiles. Our next SFB was the smallest on site. Here the pit was less than half the size of the previous example, and it had two large post holes on the outside. But the post holes were spaced more than 2.5 metres apart, indicating the structure covered a bigger area than the pit. This SFB may not have had a sunken floor, as the pit only extended beneath part of the structure. Our next SFB was this sub-rectangular pit in the bottom right. This measured more than 2.5 metres long, and it had a large central post hole and contained a fragment of a quernstone. And the final SFB is this rectangular pit, which measured more than 3 metres long and had evidence for several small post holes within the pit. And it also had this unusual deeper section that had been dug against one side of it, which is the area that's filled with water in the picture. And this deeper section was filled with a waterlogged silt and contained a big stone in there. So, unusual deeper sections and pits continued with this other interesting class of feature we were finding on the site. These pits were similarly shaped to the SFBs and occasionally had evidence for post holes either within the pit or on the outside, but they all contained these unusual deeper sections in the centre, which were filled with blue clay. The activity seems to date to the 9th or 10th century, since we found part of Lincoln ware spouted pitcher in the base of one of them. Another pit in this group was found to have had the lower part lined with tree bark, and this might actually be part of a hollowed out tree. Several stones have been placed halfway down the pit, which seem to have been used as a step to allow access to the water being stored in the base. All of these features seem to have been used to contain water, and they might have been covered by a structure. A similar example of a hollowed out tree was found during the excavations of an 8th to 11th century settlement at Hedeby in northern Germany, and this was thought to be a well. The reconstruction drawing you can see on the right of the screen is it, and it's possible similar water management activity was occurring at Wanlip during this period. So yeah, thank you, and now Andy's going to continue with the remainder of the talk.
So we may have jumped a little ahead of ourselves on the waterlogged wood, but as Richard's already mentioned, there's some overlap we think there's some overlap between the Roman activity and the early medieval. I will just say I'm going to use early medieval, Anglo-Saxon, and Saxon quite willfully interchangeably here. One of the things we're keen to look at going forwards is whether we've got definite evidence of continuity of occupation from Roman into Saxon or not. If there was a gap, are the Saxons repurposing derelict Roman enclosures and buildings? As Richard's already mentioned, we've got evidence of Saxon reuse of Roman material from the finds, but for a quick case in point, I've highlighted on the map both the known SFBs that we've got and also the Saxon enclosures. The dashed one is a Roman one, still in debate as to whether this has been reused, but it starts to tie us into the next series of discoveries. And that photo was far too good not to use, Joe. But it began in the murk of a February morning. The Joe's here showing a range of emotions to be repeated many times over the coming months. But before we go into all the exceptional waterlogged material, we need to take a little detour to understand why on earth free-draining sand on top of a hill was containing waterlogged material. So the discovery of supposedly waterlogged timber in supposedly free-draining sand caused a bit of head-scratching at first, but as the stripping progressed, we gained a better understanding of the underlying geomorphology and came to understand the circumstances of the survival of so much timber, as well as potentially gaining the key to understanding why the hilltop was occupied by the Saxons. It would seem that geomorphology and groundwater here are crucial for the settlement and understanding its location. So the hill on the lower part of the Wanlip hill consists of clay, and then there's a cap of sand sitting over the top of it. And if we translate that previous cross-section into a vertical view, and superimpose our concentrations of waterlogged material onto it, a pattern emerges. Two of the waterlogged features in particular caused not only problems for the archaeologists, but the civil engineers as well. Even in the height of the hottest summer on record, the flow of water continued to the extent that repeated bailing and pumping was in the order of the day, and I can see one or two faces nodding in the audience. But this does go to show just how valuable a resource these springs were in the past, and the level of activity and recutting and reworking of the structures that we found in them attests to this. The two circles highlighted in a darker blue towards the bottom and the south of the site, we're going to take a closer look at next, starting with the large circle. And for anybody interested, the Timberline Well is the blue dot to the west up at the top, just over here. But we'll look at this one first. Now, Wanlip's excavation has unearthed probably one of the largest assemblages of waterlogged Anglo-Saxon period timbers and timber structures found in the county to date. So far, we've got possible structural timbers, wattle line wells, tools, leather artefacts, and some pieces we're still trying to identify. We'll start with the wattle. Two large areas turned up most of the waterlogged timbers. Initially, we thought these large spreads could be potential Roman quarry pits, but what was excavated has turned out to be areas of quite intensively used Saxon water extraction. In the easternmost area, the remains of 4 in situ wattle line wells were excavated, one still containing the shoe of its last user, along with several fragmentary pieces of wattle. This, along with various circular cuts found after 100% excavation of the feature, shows that these wells have been dug and relined, then re-excavated over the natural spring line many times over. The wattle structures uncovered ranged in size from one a person could fit into to the extremely small one, which is just in front of, I think that's Erin in the photo. And hopefully these photos will give an idea of the scale of this feature overall, as it was both large, deep and very complex, and a credit to the excavation team's efforts in both digging and recording it. This was a long utilised feature. Not only were there the last in situ wells, but the fragmentary remains of early wattle structures, numerous early well cuts, waterlogged wooden debris in the features, signs of stone deposits as an attempt at ground consolidation. But one of the things we hope to be able to determine after this in post-ex is some kind of chronology of activity in this feature. As an example, can we tell if certain wells were redug deeper in response to drier conditions or in the lowering of water table in the spring line? Now, just to further emphasise the complexity of this particular feature, on the left is the drone photo that Keir took, and on the right is the survey data from this feature, which while in plan, it represents about 2 metres worth of stratigraphy from the very first slots right down to where the deepest part of it was. Now, the anaerobic conditions in waterlogged deposits haven't just preserved the wattle structures. We've also got a variety of wooden implements, or parts of wooden implements, from both main concentrations of waterlogged material. The fragment on the left, we think, is from a wooden bowl. The top right piece may have been a timber repurposed as a wooden mallet head. The right lower is a yoke of some kind, and this was reused as a stake in a revetment. And there's one piece in particular, we're still trying to work out exactly what it is. But we've got a few ideas. This curious object is what we first thought could be the remains of a Saxon shovel, and we've used the reconstruction drawing from the one found on the York Coppergate excavations. Although, according to Mike Bamforth, our wood specialist, it's more likely to be a hoe or maybe even a rake. But the reconstruction in the middle shows how tools like this were attached to the handles. But what has been the star find from the wells is this very rare piece of Saxon footwear, carefully excavated and shown off here by a beaming Harriet. We don't know whether it's a left or right one yet. Still found stuck to a large stone at the very bottom of the first wattle structure we encountered, and given how sticky the fill was over 1,000 years later, the circumstances of the loss become understandable. Meanwhile, on the eastern side of the site, and on the smaller blue dot, here another wattle structure of a very different character to the ones forming the wells was uncovered. This one appeared to be more of a barrier, although for what purpose we haven't been able to establish yet. And also with it being so close to the edge of the excavation, we don't know if there's anything more related upstream. And also a short distance downstream of it, just when the excavators thought they'd nearly finished, / escaped, more timbers started to emerge. And on the right there are Heather and Emily showing their delight at finding ever more wood just when they thought they were going to get out into drier ground. But when fully exposed, this turned into a timber revetment, which appears to have collapsed or even been pushed over post-abandonment by the weight of built-up sediment. Another task we've got to establish in post-ex is its relationship to the upstream wattle structure. Is this some measure to control the flow of water into the former Roman enclosure ditches to the south, or do we have some sort of small-scale industrial or craft function? One thing very evident from the timbers recovered from this structure and the other waterlogged features are a number of recycled timbers, such as the one in the top right. Many of them have holes and shaping which clearly indicate some prior purpose, but for what is still being established, craft tools or structural timbers. But this use of recycled timbers is interesting because along with the mix of properly cut states, it raises the question of whether this was a planned structure or something constructed as a haste in response to something like increased erosion upstream or a drought needing retention of water. Now, on to the very last feature and the very last area we tackled on the excavation. Believe it or not, this drone shot contains a feature which took a lot of careful excavation towards the end of the project, and what you're looking at is what we believe to be a Saxon midden, which has been reused the upper part of the Roman trackway and holloway, which Richard was describing earlier. We'd left this feature to the very last in order to prioritise more urgently needed areas of archaeology, and this area took the 3 orange dots, one of which is myself, about a week and a half to weed it all again before we could start work on it. But if the darker green of the vegetation doesn't give you an idea of its course, overlaying is the grid square pattern that we excavated it to. Bins like this are fairly rare, so every opportunity was taken to gain as much data as possible on distribution of finds and sequences of deposition within the broader area. We ultimately excavated 100% of this feature, and it was excavated in a 2-metre grid, each grid in 10-centimetre spits, and with every find GPS recorded and every spit sampled. So we should get some very good data from this in the future. But in the meantime, much of the environmental samples of the feature have yet to be processed, but we can give you a quick showcase of the finds out of it. So Tom's very nice early medieval pot. We've got Roman coins out of it and early medieval brooch. We got more than one coin, didn't we, Rich?
2 coins.
2.
Yeah, we did have 2 Roman coins.
And almost at the end. But at the moment, there's a lot of work still to do, probably over the next couple of years. I hope you've all enjoyed the quick taster of what the site has had to offer. But we will end with one last thought. Even with everything we found on this site, there were still features running beyond the edge of excavation. And we might be looking at our next generation of archaeologists, but there could be a phase 3 to Wanlip coming. And I think that will conclude our talk. So thank you all for coming and listening.
Yes, and just very, very long haul, wasn't it?
Very.
With especially with the developers right next to us all the time and finding all this amazing archaeology. We have to manage their expectations quite a lot, almost every week. But finding when you're working with Severn Trent, if you find lots of evidence of water management, that's a great thing to do, isn't it? But you'll hear much more about both of these projects. But this one, I think, has such a lot to think about with post-ex in terms of not only continuity of occupation and landscape, but looking at those transitions that we're always trying to think about and learn more about, and there's bound to be some really good evidence to come from this one, isn't there, really? Let alone being another very large Anglo-Saxon settlement for our area and the Midlands, which are increasingly they're quite rare to find. That this one will stand against our other big settlement at Kettleby as one of those type sites, I think, in the future. But it offers something a lot different to Kettleby because it's formed in a very different way. So more to come from both of these sites. You'll hear more about these over the next year as we're going forward with them. So thanks very much for coming and joining us tonight and hearing about these sites. And wish you all a happy Christmas and see you again next time. Thanks a lot.